On today's episode, we are joined by Alec Papesh. Alec is the Director of Strategic Partnerships at NCS Credit, the industry's only B2B full-service provider of notice and mechanics lien, UCC filing, and commercial collection services. Alec consults credit associations and industry trade groups nationwide, providing expert guidance on the complexities of construction credit and the Uniform Commercial Code. Alec specializes in demonstrating the advantages of secure transactions and leveraging technology to improve operational efficiency and strengthen financial reporting capabilities. Join us for a great conversation on The Credit Line. Well, thank you, Alec, for joining us on the Credit Line podcast. As we are rolling through many different interviews, I'm glad to finally have gotten to yours, as you have a pretty interesting story about being third generation at NCS Credit and wanting to know more about exactly that journey. And I know you maybe not be able to go in super detail about past generations, but now how did you get to where you are now, and what do you hope to eventually bring to the business and to credit professionals, and to kind of stand out from the different family traditions or whatever it might be further down the line as you go further and further into your career. I'd love for you to just kind of talk about the history and your journey through that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, Jonathan, thank you and NACM for having me and NCS on the podcast. It's always nice to explore different avenues of speaking, both in, obviously we do lots of speaking engagements, but doing the podcast form has become a very popular version, especially as LinkedIn and social media is even more shareable than ever. So we certainly appreciate the invite here. But yeah, so I'm third generation. NCS Credit is my family's business. It was founded by my grandfather, Howard Cowan, back in 1970 and started as a commercial collection agency. NCS's goal was to form trusted partnerships and provide debt recovery services amongst all of its clients at the time. NCS earned a reputation as the leading authority in the credit industry, but quickly realized that much of the commercial debt we were receiving was unsecured, and we wanted to help fix that issue. So in the early 1980s, NCS expanded its service offerings by adding mechanics lien services and UCC services, with the focus of ensuring that our clients are now secured and thus hopefully avoiding commercial debt recovery in totality. Or if we were to still receive those placements, collecting on a secured basis becomes exponentially easier. We also added our education and resources services aimed at establishing partnerships with groups like NACM and just provide some source of continuing education to our clients and other credit professionals, because at that time, there weren't this ecosystem of education to kind of pull from. Obviously, the internet was in its infancy stages, and a lot of the information that we were distributing was paper format, which I know sounds crazy to even mention non-digital formatting these days. So fast forward another 10 years, after my grandfather's sudden death in 1990, his wife, my grandmother, Dolores, or Dee, took over, and leadership was eventually passed to my mother, Mary, who is our current president. My mom has grown, professionalized, and upheld NCS to extremely high standards, which matches our premium reputation in the marketplace. I'm extremely proud to obviously be her son, be third generation, and see all the work that she's done on the business. Today, NCS primarily serves clients through the United States and Canada, and is still the industry leader in notice, lien, UCC, and commercial debt recovery services. So that's my family, but then comes me. I have a little bit different of a background. I graduated from New York University with a degree in finance and economics. I spent the first 5 years of my career in banking, focused on mergers and acquisitions, and I joined NCS in 2022 with a slightly different angle of credit, being way more entrenched in the numbers versus operations like my grandfather, my grandmother, and my mom. My day-to-day at that time was helping entrepreneurs grow their businesses. I wanted to take that same leap of faith and do the same thing with my family's business. Now, I will acknowledge I am extremely fortunate to be stepping into a well-oiled machine that, again, my grandma, grandpa, and mom have created. I won't have the stories like many other entrepreneurs about starting in a garage, burning the midnight oil, but that doesn't necessarily make the road all that easier. in the back of my head, and for those listening who are also part of family businesses, I'm sure you've heard the same saying. There's a common saying for family businesses, and that is the first generation makes it, the second generation maintains it, and the third generation destroys it, for a lack of a better term. Third generation business owners have a much higher probability of entitlement, low effort, comfortability, low risk, characteristics that aren't really conducive of growth. So it's rare that a family owned business surpasses the third generation, but I'm confident NCS will not contribute to that statistic. And as I learn more about NCS, our amazing staff, our clients, and our industry, I always hear a familiar saying, and that is, I didn't go to school to be in credit. And I laugh every time I hear that because obviously I've been hearing that phrase my entire life and never really understood what it meant until I joined, because I didn't either. In fact, I went quite the opposite. But here I am. And so as you get older, though, you realize that credit is really a process of due diligence and not necessarily defining who or what some sort of job is, but really just ensuring things get done correctly. And we all do this in some capacity, especially in our personal lives. So, with this credit focus in mind and working not to screw all of this up, I'm constantly thinking about how credit will change, what hurdles NCS will face, and more importantly, how we will adapt to these changes. The answer, at least right now, is undoubtedly technology. We have AI and machine learning on the horizon, but more importantly is how are we going to be implementing these into our industry? How do we stay ahead of the curve so that our clients continue to see us as a pillar of their credit community and continue to use our services?
Yeah, wow. I mean, they mentioned I was reading the quote in our notes about the generational, first generation, second generation. It's weird because I haven't heard it, but I've definitely seen it. And subconsciously, I was like, oh, that's a lot of pressure on you. And when it comes to the stigma or the expectation almost, and obviously, yeah, it's not something that you would want to continue. You want it to be different, and there is a pressure, but from what I've just heard briefly, it seems as if you're very strong-willed on making sure that doesn't happen, and there's a lot of goals in mind and maybe different approaches, which is, it's always good to have change, to be adaptable to different things, and hearing different people talk about, say, within the credit industry or any other industry, hearing those things is always a good sign, and trying to stay ahead of the curve, as you mentioned, technology, and going from three generations back about how everything was a paper format, and yeah, that might sound crazy or whatever. I mean, we still kind of do some of that, and I feel like we're in that transition out of
Definitely.
paper. Unless you're maybe in accounting or something like that, where you have to have paper trails for 7 years or something. But um, as we move into the technology part of the business or just the industry itself, as I've mentioned before in different recordings of different episodes, that I'm currently studying a lot of software engineering and computer science, cybersecurity, all that stuff. I know technology touches every business, every organization, every industry. The big hype words are AI, machine learning,
Sure.
everything. And that's the marketing word. And obviously, it's more about how you can use the data provided to automate and all these things. So I'm curious, first, is just to kind of get it off, starting off well with the AI stuff and kind of letting that conversation drive itself, is did you feel the pressure to implement AI or get it started going because of all the hype around it and market shares and this and that? And I'm curious to see, like, within the credit industry, is it far removed from using all that stuff, or is it actually quite prevalent and there's a lot of tools out there now?
I don't think there was pressure implementing it into NCS. I mean, historically, we've always been at the forefront of technology, whatever what that was at the time. But we work with such a wide variety of a client base now, from a two-man mom and pop shop to Fortune 500 companies, and really, it was the larger companies that have kind of pushed us to move in that direction. Not because like, hey, you're not a good partner. etc. But there's just not enough people to service the same jobs there was. And so with the credit profession shrinking ever so slightly, as the new generation comes up, technology is really the only way to plug those gaps. So if you have these large organizations continuing to grow, they're forced to do something. You can't hire more people. You can outsource all you want, but at some point, these repetitive tasks need to be somewhat automated. And so with notice and mechanics liens, we have done a great job of staying in lockstep with our clients and offering them, best in class technology. And some of that, goes to fully automating the work that's done between us and our clients, it's really unique.
Yeah, I probably figured that the larger companies would not necessarily put the pressure on, but like have maybe even the resources to
Exactly.
want that. And ever since the pandemic, I know the shortages of filling in spots or getting people to, apply or to have a expertise in something like this is diminished. And a lot of companies do feel that. And yes, the technology helps with the filling in those gaps. And I'm really curious to see how, as way back when we were, industrial revolution and all these different things, and how people thought these jobs were going to be taken in this thing
Mhm.
and this thing and this thing, and then we're off better for it. Is that, I mean, it is clearly happening now with the technology part of it. I'm curious to see truly how that plays out. And I know it's always said like the AI doesn't necessarily replace the job; it just provides the tools to do the job better, and hopefully you know how to use it. Um, that's another thing, is the training. You think it's as intuitive as just like, well, it's already doing everything for me, but you still need to know how to use the tool right. Um, and I wanted to kind of jump a little more as we're on the technology train about the security and the bigger issues about like scamming and phishing and these things. And it's a smaller topic, so we don't have to hang on it too much. But I'm always curious to see how that's either elevated the scam people to doing their job even more proficiently and to get, what they want, or like as a business, how the security measures have doubled or tripled or whatever has been taken as the technology has advanced. Because I know AI is a big part of people using that to get information from companies that are, important and confidential, and using AI helps bridge language barriers and all these different things. And so I'm curious to see, or get your take on it just briefly. Not necessarily that anything's happened within your business, but how it either helped or how you've seen people use it maliciously.
Yeah, well, I can confidently, I have no problem saying we have had no issues with cybersecurity. We have our SOC certifications, which is like a cybersecurity certification. So, I don't from a it's actually interesting because obviously the most common form of scamming and phishing in any industry that's really business services is through email, right? We click on our link and they get into our system. So with a lot of our API or flat file integration, that completely eliminates the communication between two people. It's now two systems. So people on their system and their own intranet on their company are putting in a service request and they click a button and it moves over to NCS's system without the need to exchange email. So there's way less of the human error of clicking on malicious links or picking up a phone and talking to someone who's not actually their client, fishing for information, etc. But there does go to say that it's now not necessarily as obvious as clicking a link, but more so of people on purpose, with the intent of getting into a system, trying to steal customer information, which we've seen again. But um, for our customers, we haven't dealt with this issue. I personally haven't heard any horror stories just yet of someone hacking into a system and stealing project information. Luckily, I don't think this is ground. There's no social security numbers or anything like that. It is company information, which is confidential and very important and proprietary to some. But luckily, we have everything buttoned up, and knock on wood, haven't really seen any even attempts to be malicious in this regard.
Yeah, and that's always good. And yeah, knock on wood, as people, they always as I was studying, they always say like, "Oh, why would I be targeted?" Like, we're so far removed, or we're just this, and it's like
Yep.
people don't care what you do; they just want your stuff.
Mhm. They'll find someone who
And
will buy it, and that's all it is at
exactly,
the end of the day is finding the
and
buyer for some information.
information is very wanted and expensive and sought after, and whether or not you think it's worth it or not is not up to you, I suppose. So yeah, I think we touched upon this thing about how people might interact with technology and how has it changed. If you want to, I don't know if you want to further elaborate or go further into that. I know we talk about like the paper formatting to digital and all these things, but um, I guess more within the industry, how has that really shifted? I mean, we take the pandemic and we went from Zoom. Apparently, Zoom was like the biggest thing ever, and it existed all of a sudden overnight. I don't understand it, but it just did. How has that shifted the playing field? Has it allowed for more opportunities for like business or interactions or collaborations, or has it actually kind of been almost like a facade? Like it, all these tools provide these features, but really, it's actually hasn't bridged a lot of gaps between clients or whatever it might be. Because I think sometimes technology markets itself really nice, puts a nice little ribbon on it, and makes it look pretty, but it's kinda gimmicky, and a lot of times it ends up being more just about making the money on that other side of the business rather than actually helping an organization. Now, I know it doesn't happen a lot, but I definitely can see companies doing that or have done that or have, we've been victims to it. So I'm curious to see how that interaction from a client to product maker or whatever it might be is either helped or enhanced the business function.
Yeah, no, it's a great point with COVID as well, and that's not something I kind of left in the back of my mind when preparing for this is that really was the push that a lot of these smaller businesses, they had to either go remote, have the Zoom capabilities, start to do things more digitally, or not exist. And so if people were uncomfortable with technology, then you kinda had no choice for about 2 years there, and a lot of people did end up adapting, and I actually also agree with your point that there are always bad actors in the space, and technology is such a sexy word today that people can kinda get around having these empty business models and forcing you to enter into some sort of contract, that's like, "Hey, we know what's best for your company," when really it's not really the way that it's perceived, or it's not gonna actually help you the way that you think it's gonna help you just because they don't know your business and they're selling you a vanilla model, if you will. Um, but then that also goes to credit professionals as well. We all had to also, as business were changing, individuals had to change as well. And I think there's a permanent paradigm shift to what a credit professional looks like today. And I didn't think it would have significant changes, at this post-COVID world, if you are even allowed to say that anymore. It's just, we're definitely removed from that. But um, I am a proponent of technology advances, but I also want to make a clear distinction, and this kind of goes to your point. I do think that AI, and I'm just speaking broadly about AI, I think it'll be exponentially important as Gen X, the baby boomers, exit the workforce. As I mentioned before, the next generation does not have as many people, so there are more seats available and less people taking them. So, AI are not going to replace jobs, and as you mentioned, it gives you the tools to be more efficient. But it will replace some jobs. Yeah, I think we'd be ignorant not to think that the ones that are heavily reliant on simple, repetitive tasks will be automated. It's just from an economic standpoint, it makes more sense to have things like that. However, there will be a much higher demand for critical thinking. So the days of credit managers managing groups of people and ensuring tasks are completed are over, or at least becoming way less common. Instead, you're gonna have people managing less people who are more efficient because of the technology or tools again that you mentioned. So, look at today. I mean, credit teams are outsourced, AR management is outsourced, project management is outsourced. It doesn't mean it's being outsourced to offshore companies. It could just be moved to another software company that could do it more efficient. One thing I always like to and goes for my economic background, is the term comparative advantage. I really like bringing that up when we talk about technology because so the word is most commonly used in economics, but obviously it could be applied to other fields as well. So comparative advantage, by definition, is describes a situation in which an individual, business, or country can produce a good or service at a lower opportunity cost than another. So, in layman's terms, if you live in a country that can't grow grapes, you probably shouldn't be making wine. This doesn't make a lot of sense. You're gonna waste a lot of resources. Similarly, if you're a company that doesn't have staff to support your basic credit functions, you shouldn't force it to happen. And a lot of people are realizing that there are arm's length partners like an NCS that can take some of that burden off of their shoulders. So I think the credit profession and the credit world, their day-to-day routines will be changing. I think technology can help complete the repetitive task much more efficiently. Reports, which are huge, are easy to generate. Statistics on spending to calculate ratios to improve your working capital will be easier. Basic functions are just easier. But I will continue to mention it here and in all my speaking engagements is critical thinking is going to become more important. Being able to see what technology is doing or diagnose a problem is going to be more important than ever. You have more information available to your at your fingertips about your company and your statistics and your performance than you've ever had before. And so with that, what are you going to do? You have to make a plan.
This podcast is brought to you by Careers in Credit. If you're an employer looking for top talent, or if you're seeking exciting career opportunities in the credit industry, Careers in Credit has you covered. They offer a range of outstanding job listings from excellent employers ready to hire. As an employer, you can effortlessly create and edit job postings, email your listings to relevant job seekers, and set up resume search alerts to find the perfect candidates for your team. Plus, you can view and print reports and statistics to keep track of your hiring progress. If you're on the lookout for your next career move, explore the vast array of opportunities available at Careers in Credit. So, get connected today by visiting careersincredit.org, and your next great hire or career opportunity starts here. Right. Yeah, we have so much information. I mean, not literally at our fingertips. I mean, even my watch can do a lot more than what we could. But now we have tools that are specifically designed, and I think that's really key. Mentioning the critical thinking, you're not going to be so much of those mindless jobs in a way. I don't want to like put, throw any shade at those kind of jobs because they are important, obviously. But as
Absolutely.
we can automate and allow for a higher level of thinking and perhaps make a better product and have the greater mind collective, pour towards something greater, I always think that is good. And there'll be other mundane things that AI may not be able to do well yet, and those jobs will still be there, and would just be at a higher level. And I wanted to ask, like, separating ourselves from technology is as people are entering the credit industry, and of course, as we kind of hear the narrative being it's kind of by accident. And that's kind of what the podcast and all the other resources that we're trying to build out here at NACM Connect is to bridge the gap from the generations and bring awareness to it. But who would you say the credit industry or the credit profession is for?
Well, nobody intentionally, right? But obviously, just kidding. But no, people don't go to school for that. I mean, it's true. It's common with folks my age, but the people entering the credit industry today are really they're from all organizations, and that's why I was kind of broad in the way I defined credit earlier, where it's not like you have to go to school for math or finance or econ or accounting. As long as you have an eye for diligence and making sure that things get done the correct way, then you're an applicable person for credit. And so I've had the pleasure of interacting with folks that have come from, branch managers at banks. They started at like, a small finance role at a food and bev company, or they've done retail and just they had cash management skills that they realized like, hey, this could translate to an AR specialist at a Fortune 500 company. It's interesting that it's always a similar type of person that just is astute for numbers or likes being careful with the way that things are accounted. So it's a little bit of accounting in a sense, but really just more you enjoy the process of diligence. And it's interesting though because the credit profession is becoming way less line item by line item review of things, and more so having an open mind and being able to involve technology in your day to day. There's going to be that aspect of it as well. So you involve critical thinking, open mindedness. It can become quite a rewarding and stable job for some that are kind of exploring different career opportunities.
Yeah, and the more I've interviewed and talked within the industry, it's a lot of almost like detective work, especially
Yeah,
with
it
the
is forensic.
um,
Yeah.
which is sounds very appealing to me because I always like filling in the gaps and finding the clues and putting the story together. But like you said, is also being like diligent and careful and attention to detail. I think that's a probably one other big qualifier is the attention to detail because you can't leave things up to assumption or whatever it might be. And having the keen eye for those details is really important. And I want to talk about furthering education and briefly about those things because obviously we don't have college courses in universities for credit management. I know we offer our classes with credit 101 and business analysis, these things. Um, More so like talking about the benefits of getting the education or the designations of why it matters and more than just a title. What can it, especially for you and someone who's in the industry, why would those things matter and what brings value to it?
Yeah. So I call them the 3 or 4 letter, titles. There's lots of different professions and titles you can earn in the credit space. And bringing those groups of people together, again, in formats like NACM, just bring a melting pot of people coming and addressing issues from different perspectives, right? One person may come at it from an operational perspective versus accounting versus credit. And having those different mindsets really helps you get a more well-rounded view of what's actually going on. You become, even in the credit space, if you're around too many of the same type of, like, you're all in accounts receivable, it's generally you think the same way because that's your day to day, and so you wanna hear like, "Okay, well, how does sales interact with this?" Or, "How does the payable folks interact with this?" And so, just having an open mind is really key, and luckily, organizations like NACM bring together just credit professionals in general that have a wide range of, experience and titles and etcetera, and, um, bringing together those types of tools together is how we get better, and that's, um, you know, the NCS marketing team and myself, we're preparing our next generation of tools, if you will, and that's catered to kind of keep credit professionals updated with what's the latest thing. And again, we keep going back to that's technology, but that's kind of where everything is going, at least today. So, we're tailoring our, it's like, okay, how can we arm credit professionals with the education they need on a technology basis? And when we come together and have these breakout sessions and these conferences, that's always a very popular topic as well.
Yeah. Um Definitely all the education stuff, especially at the conferences and the different gatherings and webinars and things like that. It's all about the education because, and like they said, like every day you're learning something new, and you should never just think you know everything at some point.
Never, never.
You may know more than the next person, but I'm sure even for people who are experts on one thing, they've learned something valuable from someone who's been hired just new, from a different perspective or fresh eyes or whatever it might be. So just continuing education in anything is always good. With the last thing that I want to kind of touch on before we kind of conclude is a one piece of advice for entering credit professionals or ones that might be maybe have been a little bit longer in the profession. What's some advice that you would give?
Yeah, so, we're at an interesting time right now where, we have 4 different generations in the workforce, and so the advice that I give, I have to be careful because I bet you a lot of people that are gonna be listening to this have many more years in credit than I do. It would first would be to just embrace efficiency as your organization sees fit. Learn what others are doing, don't be afraid to fail, and as much as we talk about technology, don't fall in love with AI. Don't fall in love with technology. Be weary. That's our we're in credit, right? A little bit of what we do is we need to be a little pessimistic. We have to kind of push the boundaries as to why we're doing what we're doing. So just ensure that as you embrace change, that you make sure that you're still partnering with the right people. That's extremely important because, as we talked about at the top of this podcast, there will be folks that are going to lock you into contracts. They're going to sell you their product. They're going to say, "Oh, you're a square. Let's fit you in this round hole," type of thing. You know your business better than other people do. Be confident of that, and make sure that you're finding the best partner, not only for technology, but for any type of service, vendor, etc., to make your life ultimately easier, because that's ultimately the goal of why you would outsource or partner with someone else.
Yeah, awesome. That's good for anything. Like you said, being weary. I think too much of us like to jump the gun and get excited about a certain thing.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Um, and I feel like it's a natural response, and then some are the other who just never accept anything. Also, a natural response if you've been kind of stabbed in the back a few times. But no, that's really great advice, and I want to thank you, Alec, again for joining us on the podcast. And I would love to have you again, maybe with some other guests, and having a conversation about things. But as we go through our first round, I absolutely love the conversation that we had.
No, likewise, Jonathan. I appreciate the invite. I'm looking forward to making a return appearance, definitely, and we'll love to, kind of ping pong some ideas off of other credit professionals and see the current topics at that time.